Good morning, everyone. I am here today to report my part in the CIA exam, which I was assigned to do the reporting of CIA Part 1. In CIA Part 1, it is consists of two domains, which are Domain 4, which focuses on Quality Assurance and Improvement Program. Domain 5 focuses on Governance, Risk Management, and Control. Domain 4 can be found in the Principle 12, Enhanced Quality. The Principle 12, Enhanced Quality, tells that the chief audit executive is responsible for internal audit function, conformance with the global internal audit standards, and continuous performance and improvement. Quality is a combined measure of conformance with the global internal audit standards and the achievement of internal audit functions performance objectives. Therefore, a quality assurance and improvement program is designed to evaluate and promote the internal audit function's conformance with the standards, achievement of performance objectives, and pursuit of continuous improvement. The program includes internal and external assessments. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for ensuring that the internal audit function is continuously seeking improvement. This requires developing measures to assess performance of internal audit engagements, internal auditors, and the internal audit function. These measures form the basis of evaluating progress toward performance objectives, including continuous improvement. Standard 12.1 Internal Quality Assessment. The requirement: the Chief Audit Executive must develop and conduct internal assessments of the internal audit function's conformance with the global internal audit standards and progress toward performance objectives. The Chief Audit Executive must establish a methodology for internal assessments as described in Standard 8.3 Quality that includes ongoing monitoring of the internal audit functions, conformance with the standards, and progress toward performance objectives. Periodic self-assessments or assessments by other persons within the organizations with sufficient knowledge of internal audit practices to evaluate conformance with the standards. Third, communication with the board and senior management about the results of internal assessments. Ongoing monitoring involves a day-to-day supervision, review, and measurement of internal audit function. Ongoing monitoring is incorporated into the routine policies and practices used to manage the internal audit function that includes the processes, tools, and information necessary to evaluate conformance with the standards. Periodic self-assessments Periodic self-assessments provide a more holistic, comprehensive review of the standards and the internal audit function. Periodic self-assessments address conformance with every standard, whereas ongoing monitoring may focus on the standards relevant to performing engagements. Periodic self-assessments may be conducted by senior members of the internal audit function, a dedicated quality assurance team, individuals within the internal audit function who have attained the certified internal auditor designation to have extensive experience with the standards or individuals with audit competencies from elsewhere in the organization. The chief audit executive should consider including internal auditors in the periodic self-assessment process to improve their understanding of the standards. Standard 12.2 Performance Measurement. The chief audit executive must develop objectives to evaluate the internal audit's functions performance. The chief audit executive must consider the input and expectation of the board and senior management when developing the performance objectives. The chief audit executive must develop a performance measurement methodology to assess progress towards achieving the function's objectives and promote the continuous improvement of the internal audit function. When assessing the internal audit's function's performance, the chief audit executive must solicit feedback from the board and senior management as appropriate. The, aud- the chief audit executive must develop an action plan to address issues and opportunities for improvement. The establishment of performance objective is critical whether an internal audit function is fulfilling its mandate in conformance with standards and achieving improvement. In accordance with the function strategy, establishment of performance objectives should take into consideration the desired outcomes articulated within the principles of global internal audit standards, the internal audit charter, the internal audit functions strategy. Standard 12.3 Oversee and improve engagement performance. Requirements. The Chief Audit Executive must establish and implement methodologies for engagement, supervision, quality assurance, and development of competencies. The Chief Audit Executive or an engagement supervisor must provide internal auditors with guidance throughout the engagement, verify work programs are complete, and confirm engagement work papers adequately support findings, conclusion, and recommendations. To assure quality, the Chief Audit Executive must verify whether the engagement are performed in conformance with the standards and internal audit functions methodologies. To develop competencies, the Chief Audit Executive must provide internal auditors with feedback about their performance and opportunities. Standard 12.3 Oversee and improve engagement performance. Considerations for implementation, key responsibilities, and processes for the Chief Audit Executive and engagement supervisors in internal audit engagements. Engagement planning. The CAE or designated supervisor reviews engagement objectives and approves the work program, ensuring it meets objectives effectively. Staff development supervision includes opportunities for staff development, such as post engagement meetings, discuss performance and outcomes. Ongoing skills assessments, the skills of internal auditors are assessed continuously, helping to identify qualified individuals for supervising engagements and assigning tasks appropriately. Effective communication. Engagement communications must be accurate, clear, and timely. The supervisor ensures work papers to support these communications, training and evaluation, regular meetings between the supervisor and internal auditors provide training opportunities, and supervisors may request additional evidence for clarity. Documentation reviews, supervisor review notes may be cleared or retained separately, depending on whether concerns have been adequately addressed. Professional judgment, the CAE is ultimately responsible for all decisions made during engagements. Methodologies should be in place to minimize the inconsistent judgments, and ethical issues should be escalated to the appropriate parties. So this is the next domain, which is the domain 5, which focuses on governance, risk management, and control. Principle 9, plan strategically. Requirements. The Chief Audit Executive plans strategically to position the internal audit function to fulfill its mandate and achieve long-term success. Planning strategically requires the Chief Audit Executive to understand the internal audit mandate and the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. A properly resourced and positioned internal audit function develops and implements a strategy to support the organization's success. In addition, the Chief Audit Executive creates and implements methodologies to guide the internal audit function and develop an internal audit plan. Standard 9.1 Understanding Governance, Risk Management, and Control Processes. Requirements. To develop an effective internal audit strategies and plan, the Chief Audit Executive must understand the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. To understand governance processes, the Chief Audit Executive must consider how the organization establishes strategic objectives, and makes strategic operational decisions, oversees risk management and control, promotes an ethical culture, delivers effective manage- performance management and accountability, structures its management and operating functions, communicates risk and control information throughout the organization, coordinates activities and communications among the board, internal and external providers of assurance, services, and management. Standard 9.1. Ah, to understand risk management and control processes, the chief audit executive must consider how the organization identifies and assesses significant risk and selects appropriate control processes. Sorry. This includes understanding how the organization identifies and manages the following key risk areas. First, reliability and integrity of financial and operational information. Second, effectiveness and efficiency of operations and programs. Safeguarding of assets. And lastly, compliance with laws and or regulations. The chief audit executive plays a crucial role in understanding and evaluating an organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. This understanding is essential for developing an effective internal audit strategy and plan. The CAE gathers information from various sources, including discussions with board and senior management. This helps the CAE understand the organization's strategic direction, priorities, and risk appetite. Reviews board Reviews of board and senior management, minutes, and presentation. Analyzing these documents provides insight into the board's oversight of governance, risk, and control activities. Communications and work papers from internal audit engagement. This provides the CAE with a historical perspective on the organization's processes and controls. Assessments and reports from other assurance providers, external auditors, regulators, and other assurance providers offer valuable insights into the organization's risk profile and control environment. Standard 9.2 Internal Audit Strategy Requirements. The Chief Audit Executive must develop and implement a strategy for the internal audit function that supports the strategic objectives and success of the organization and aligns with the expectations of the board and senior management and other key stakeholders. An internal audit strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve a long-term or overall objective. The internal audit strategy must include a vision, strategic objectives, and supporting initiatives for the internal audit function. An internal audit strategy helps guide the internal audit function toward the fulfillment of the internal audit mandate. The chief audit executive must review the internal audit strategies with the board and senior management periodically. Considerations for implementation. The chief audit executive plays a key role in developing and implementing a strategic internal audit function. This involves considering the organization's strategy and objectives, as well as the expectation of the board, senior management, and key other stakeholders. Here are some key considerations for implementing an internal audit strategy. First, vision and strategic objectives. Vision. The vision describes the desired future state of the internal audit function. It provides direction and inspiration for continuous improvement. Strategic objectives. These are achievable targets that help attain the vision. They outline specific goals for the internal audit function. These are more specific tactics and steps for achieving each strategic objective. Developing the strategy, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threat analysis. This helps identify areas for improvement and opportunities to enhance the internal audit function. Gap analysis. This compares the current state of internal audit function with the desired state, identifying areas for improvement. Implementation. Prioritization. Actions should be prioritized and assigned target dates. Technology. incorporate technology to improve efficiency and effectiveness, competency, development, provide opportunities for internal auditors to enhance their skills and knowledge. Periodic review. The strategy should be reviewed regularly to ensure it remains aligned with the organization's changing needs and expectations. Factors triggering review. Changes in the organization's strategy or maturity of its governance, risk management, and control processes, and changes the organization's policies, procedures, laws, or regulations. Changes in board members, senior management, or the CAE. Results of internal and external assessments of the internal audit function, performance measurement. The CAE should design a timeline for implementation and establish performance measures. Periodic reviews and should include discussions with the board and senior management about the progress made on initiatives. Evidence of conformance. Documented internal audit strategy including vision, objectives and initiatives, minutes or correspondence from meetings with stakeholders, notes showing the information and analysis that inform the strategy in internal audit methodologies for producing and reviewing the strategy, results of periodic self-assessments or other reviews of progress. The Chief Audit Executive must establish methodologies to provide internal audit function in a systematic and disciplined manner, to implement an internal audit strategy, to develop internal audit plan, and conform with the standards. The Chief Audit Executive must evaluate the effectiveness of the methodology and update them as necessary to improve the internal audit function and respond to significant changes that affect the function. The Chief Audit Executive must provide internal auditors with training on the methodologies. Considerations for implementation. Documented methodologies are essential for implementing the internal audit strategies, achieving the internal audit plan, and conforming with the standards. These methodologies should cover the internal audit function's approach to first, risk assessment, assessing risk for the organizations and for each engagement, internal audit plan, developing and updating the internal audit plan, assurance versus advisory, determining the balance between assurance and advisory engagements, coordination with assurance providers, coordinating with internal and external assurance providers, internal audit engagements, external service providers, managing external service providers when used, internal audit engagements, performing the internal audit engagements, communication, communicating throughout internal audit services, record retention and release, retaining and releasing engagement records and other information consistent with organizational guidelines and regulatory requirements. Recommendations implementation, monitoring and confirming the implementation of internal auditors' recommendations or management action plans. Quality assurance and improvement, assuring the quality and improvement of the internal audit function. Performance measurement, developing performance with measurements to assess progress towards meeting objectives. Additional services, performing additional services identified in the internal audit mandate. Consideration for implementations. Review and updating methodologies. The effectiveness of internal audit methodologies should be reviewed during assessments of the internal audit function's quality. Reasons for updating established methodologies include changes in standards and guidance, significant changes in professional internal audit standards and guidance, legal and regulatory requirements, changes in legal or regulatory requirements, technology, advancement in technology, departmental changes, changes in department size or composition, leadership changes, a change of chief audit executive or board chairman. Evidence of conformance. Evidence of conformance with internal audit methodologies include software documentation, documentation of software programs incorporating methodologies, communication documentation, meeting agendas and minutes, emails, signed acknowledgements, training schedules, or similar documentation evidencing communications to internal audit personnel about internal audit methodologies, quality review documentation, documentation of quality reviews of audit work, demonstrating that methodologies are followed, standards reference footnotes or endnotes within the methodologies of internal audit, manual citing, and right, the standard that the content is addressing. Methodology update documentation, documentation of updates to the methodologies. Standard 9.4 Internal Audit Plan. The Chief Audit Executive must create an internal audit plan that supports the achievement of the organization's objectives. The Chief Audit Executive must base the internal audit plan on a documented assessment of the organization's strategies, objectives, and risks. This assessment must be performed by input from the board and senior management, as well as the Chief Audit Executive's understanding of the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes. The assessment must be performed at least annually. The internal audit plan must consider the internal audit mandate and the full range of agreed to internal audit services, specify internal audit services that supports the evaluation and improvement of the organization's governance, risk management, and control processes, consider coverage of information, technology, and governance, fraud risk, and the effectiveness of the organization's compliance and ethics programs, and other high-risk areas. Identify the necessary human, financial, and technological resources necessary to complete the plan. Be dynamic and updated timely in response to changes in the organization's business, risk operations, programs, systems, controls, and organizational culture. The Chief Audit Executive must review and revise internal audit plan as necessary and communicate timely to the board and senior management the impact of any resource limitations on internal audit coverage, the rationale for not including an assurance engagement in a high-risk area or activity in the plan, conflicting the demands for services between major stakeholders such as high-priority requests based on emerging risk and requests to replace planned assurance engagements with advisory engagements, limitations on scope or restrictions on access to information. The Chief Audit Executive must discuss the internal audit plan, including significant interim changes with the board and senior management. The plan and the significant changes to the plan must be approved by the board. Considerations for implementation. Organization-wide risk assessment. Frequency. Conduct an organization-wide risk assessment at least annually with potential updates every 6 months, quarterly, or even monthly if the environment is dynamic. Considerations. The assessment should factor in the organization's size, complexity, and changes relative to the maturity of governance, risk management, and control processes. Audit universe definition. An audit universe organizes auditable units, such as business units, processes, programs, to identify and assess risk based on the organization's objectives and strategic initiatives. Linking risk and the chief audit executive should connect these units to key risks, which helps prioritize risk for further evaluation during audits. Independent validation. The internal audit function should be independently review and validate key risks identified within the organization's risk management system, relying on management information only if the risk management processes are deemed effective. Continuous risk assessment. The CAE should gather information from past audits and discussions with board members and senior management and may implement a methodology for ongoing risk assessment, considering both negative impacts and opportunities. Internal audit development. The CAE should consider multiple factors when creating audit plan, including legal and regulatory requirements, engagement critical to the organization's mission, areas with significant risk levels, resource availability and request from the board and management, engagement scheduling, considerations for scheduling internal audit Engagement includes operational priorities, the timing of external audits, auditor availability, and access to activities under review. Proposed internal audit plan. The plan should retail resources and hours available available for engagement, a list of proposed engagement with their focus and objectives, rationale, rationale for engagement selection, scopes, and contingency hours. Managing the changes. The CAE board and senior management should agree on criteria for significant changes requiring plan revisions. The board should be informed of any necessary changes immediately, and formal approval should follow. Evidence of conformance. Samples of conformance include approved internal audit plan, documented assessment and prioritizations, meeting minutes discussing the audit universe and plan, documentations and documentation of discussions and methodology related to risk assessment and plan changes. Standard 9.5 Coordinations and Reliance. Chief Audit Executive must coordinate with external and external providers of assurance services and consider relying upon their work. Coordination of services minimizes duplication of efforts, highlights gaps in coverage of key risks, and enhances the overall value added by providers. If unable to achieve an appropriate level of coordination, the Chief Audit Executive must raise any concerns with senior management and, if necessary, the board. When the internal audit function relies on the work of other assurance service providers, the Chief Audit Executive must document the basis for that reliance and still and is still responsible for the conclusions reached by the internal audit function. Methodology evaluating assurance providers. Development. The CAE should create a methodology to assess the assurance and advisory service providers, which includes a basis for relying on their work. Evaluation criteria. Consider the roles, responsibilities, independence, competency, objectivity, and due professional cares of the providers. The CAE should also understand the objectives, scopes, and result of the work. Identification of assurance providers, internal assurance functions may include compliance, environmental financial control, health and safety, information security, legal risk, legal risk management, and quality assurance, typically reporting to senior management. External providers, external assurance providers may report to senior management, external stakeholders, or directly to the CAE. So coordination of assurance activities. Let's go to process variation. The coordination process may range from informal in small organizations to formal in larger, heavily regulated ones. Confidentiality requirements must be considered when meeting the providers. Assurance map creation. The CAE can develop an assurance map linking significant risk categories with internal and external assurance sources. This map helps identify gaps and overlaps. Assurance coverage. Combined assurance approach by coordinating the internal audit functions engagement with other providers, the CAE can enhance efficiency and reduce redundancy. Skip. So thank you everyone for listening.